Thank you, Frank. Thank
you.
you. You will notice that I'm trying to combine these two, a two for sale in one, because of course they are so interrelated that it is difficult to talk about one without the other, although there is so much information that I will have to try to unite it when I can. Some of us are going there on trips very soon when we think about England and France. And we think they are so very different, and yes, they are. But we know, I suspect everybody here, educated as you are, knows about the fact that they come basically out of the High Middle Ages, that essentially there was no France or England before that time. And even when we talk about it, we don't use that N word, which is nationalism, because I cannot tell you all the young people I've excoriated who've used that word. I know, because they'll say, are you talking about nationalism? I said, indeed not. And yeah, washing that mouth out. I said, don't you dare say that until the 19th century. Because it's just really, if you stop and think about it, it's hard to imagine that people have that spirit of unity. And yeah, we're one of those, and we love our fellow citizens and all of that. That's why I'm emphasizing the word monarchy. That is the basic structure of what will become the country. But the areas are very, very much apart during all the period covered in this course, for sure. The illustration here, of course, is clearly from the church, and you'll notice that the writing is in medieval French, which is kind of a surprise, isn't it? We always think these things are going to be in Latin, but you can see, if you have this online, I'm sure you do, that the lettering, you can make it out at all. Comment we j'appelle, and you see all the words. Prièrement. In other words, that was the French of probably the 13th, 14th century, and they are writing about the beginnings, and they obviously a very talented artistic writer who also painted. And so we have, there is Hugh, Count of Paris, and of course the fleur-de-lis. And it's very beautiful, and it must have required a great deal of skill. So he's recording events as he saw them, and that is what we have. A very shadowy figure, I must add. Hugh Capet, virtually nothing is known about him except what you would call stereotypical, meaning he was firm and devout and so forth and so on, in the sense of the way we would expect a ruler to be. Stereotype, caricature, whatever. In other words, had nothing specifically individual about Hugh, except he was chosen king. And to be Count of Paris was not as big a deal as I think it would be now. Paris was a nice city and all, but it was hardly a major place. However, its location made it a very good location. Now, why France? Well, that's because of the territory the Western Carolingians held. When that line ran out, somebody had to rule. And that would be this family, a family that would go on through its descendants until, frankly, the 19th century. So the Capetians, as the original line, went on until the 14th century, and that is to say, son after son after son, which is an amazing business if you think about in our own families, because something happens along the way and it takes one and it will change, but not in this case. They went on. So that's about all there is to say about Hugh, and frankly his immediate descendants, except they hung in there. They didn't have a lot of power. They didn't have a lot of control. They loved the church and the church loved them back. I mean, it's like, can't you tell us anything definite? That's about as far as I can go, because that's about all that anyone really knows. Now, I know many of you have been here, many of you are going, or both. And I thought this map was good because it will show you all the major areas in the day, medieval France, if you will. And of course, all this would be swept away about the French Revolution, right? But in this particular age, you really get a sense, of Paris, don't you? See Paris up there, and you see that little old area, and you say, oh, well, I'm sure the Count of Paris controlled it well. I'm afraid not. There are a lot of knights who weren't as loyal as they should have been, and they were misbehaving and contumacious, because according to the church, they should have been following their Lord, but they were beating up on monks and nuns. And I mean, yeah, rude. They wouldn't be in a novel, I suspect, unless they were villains. I know, because we like good people, not bad people. But the idea is, you say, well, what about those big territories, Normandy and all of those? Forget it. I mean, that's got to come later. We can't even get things settled around here. I mean, think about it. You think of all of Alabama, and we can't even calm down the people of West Point. So we got to start somewhere, and then, only then, can we move into, Montgomery or Birmingham? Yeah, no, but we're not ready. We're not ready for all of France. So basically, you get the idea that all of this is a long, drawn-out process. But how much specific do we know? Well, very little, except what I would call continuity. And that's because one ruler after another, father, son, will help create that sense of reality. And of course, we never forget feudal authority. That doesn't seem very important at first, but the idea of suzerainty will gradually become more important. And if you'll recall from the first talk, the suzerain was the head of the feudal order. And so the Count of Paris, now King of France, was the overlord of you saw the map, Count of this and that and the other, and the Duke of Burgundy or the Duke of this and that and the other. They were all lords themselves. Get it? The feudal pyramid. But the king was the suzerain. And so he had lots of power. based on that, it's more moral authority. Also, of course, he had the church on his side. In a sense, the church stood, as I said during the feudal talk, for law and order, because the king symbolized that law and order, because we don't want these knights going around and beating up on monks. And so we use excommunication against if you get rowdy or you are ugly. So the idea then is the enjoying the strong support of the church. And what does that help? Well, I think there are gifts, from the church to a king. And that's because you helped us out. And there can be a little, we do this and you do that. Maybe you have an empty church position and you have a younger child. I don't know. Maybe we can work something out. So there's all kinds of exchanges there. The king, as a matter of fact, this is something you could remember for a party, most Christian king. And you could go, oh, shucks, that is so nice. And you think I'm really, yeah, you really are. And so, of course, they'll use that in the documents. You were the most Christian king and all that. And you can imagine, I bet you say that to all the kings. But I think this becomes the official title, which I think is significant. So again, 1328 is the year, in case you want to remember that. Okay, because that would be significant. You drop that off in Paris, people would really be impressed. I'm sure they'll know just what you're talking about. Yeah, Midtown Paris. Now, this, of course, is to encourage you to go to Amazon, because I know many of you suffer from bibliophilia, and so you can't get enough. So now feed into your habit here. And this is called The Deeds of Louis the Fat. Now, we normally think of calling someone fat as rude or unkind. But you may be aware that calling someone fat in this period is like, wow, you're fat? That's cool, man. Because somebody who could eat that much, I mean, it's got to be like, you're a big deal in more ways than one, because there are not many people who could have afforded to be fat. I mean, you just don't have that much food. But this particular king, who eventually would have to be put on his horse, was apparently very, very large, and of course, died when he was pretty young. You would think, again, this would be very insulting, but apparently it was not. And you may have seen in the book, there was an interesting article about a Norman lord who was quite heavy and was buried as a monk, because they always thought of when old Satan came for him that he could say, oh, gosh, I'm a monk, so I didn't do any of those things. So you better leave me alone or God will get you. This particular work is relatively short, paperback. I'm not pushing it. I'm just saying that this is not fiction, but it has some interesting scenes in it that I think even readers of historical fiction would enjoy. Not to single anyone out, just to say that the life of Louis the Fat, again, it's formulaic in a certain way. It's like he was a nice boy and he grew up and he loved God, he loved his family, and then he was a great king, and he went around protecting the poor, and whenever he saw any bad deeds going on. He fought for what was right because it was written, as you can tell when you read the early part, it was written for his son. The writer is Suger, and you'll be able to see his work in the suburbs of Paris, which is the Abbey of Saint Denis. But Suger, describing him, and not everyone agrees. Some of the experts say he might have gone a little overboard, but he was there, and he's like what many rulers, many presidents for that matter, it's like your best buddy, your person who admires you and who writes about you after you're gone. So that's the role of Suger, and Suger becomes obviously a very important figure in terms of knowing, because we wouldn't know that much about any specific French ruler until Louis VI. And this is the famous church, which I'm afraid is now in a slum. Headquarters of the French Communist Party is nearby, but yeah, but we'll just ignore modern times and understand Saint Denis was thought to have been a disciple of Paul who got over that far west. May have been legendary, but whatever the case, Saint Denis becomes quite the hero in terms of France, quite the major Christian figure in terms of spreading the faith. So when anything is identified this way, and the remains of some kings and queens are there, so if you happen to be in the area, it would be nice to go by there and check it out. In any event, he was a major figure in the building. I would doubt very seriously if it's still used for religious purposes, but it's definitely interesting in terms of its architecture, style, and so forth. I can't imagine how long ago this photograph was made, but as you can see, not a cathedral, but it's still quite impressive, and there are remains of certain rulers and spouses, even though during the French Revolution, I'm afraid, people who were not disposed towards the monarchy removed their remains. So that's unfortunate, but Suger was a very, very influential individual. He had obviously colleagues in the monastic life, but he had a lot of associates in the royal, since he was like the king's major man. And he was basically trying to develop the monarchy as best he could. And he is probably the one who engineered the marriage of the future Louis VII to everybody's favorite, yes, the figure of so many novels. Not that I want to push historical fiction, but I want you to be aware I know about it and I know who reads it. So what did she look like? I have no idea. I'm not sure anybody does. But she has sold a lot of books and movies, I will say that. Eleanor Aquitaine, and I don't know, she is very interesting. How many women go on crusades? I mean, and queen of both England and France. Yeah, I mean, the stories of Eleanor Aquitaine are considerable. The reason that she became all that she was is connected to Suchere, because obviously Suchere was responsible for the negotiation that led to the marriage of the young Louis to her. And she was inheriting the great southern duchy of Aquitaine, as in wine, because she was the heiress, since there were no male heirs. And that's the way it was back then. If there had been a male heir, then she would not have been so important. But Suchere saw this as a way for the French monarchy to obtain Aquitaine. I remember one time taking a train, from Paris to Bordeaux, and thinking, boy, that's a long trip. Even with the fast trains that, they have. And think about then how far it was. So it's all relative, but basically it was a very, very great distance. And in the stories, they always tell about how Eleanor found Paris so unacceptable after Bordeaux. And you think, yeah, back in that day, I'm sure Paris was not the way we think of, I guess you'd say, Napoleon III's Paris, and that is 19th century, and how much it's gone. So she married Louis, and the story goes, I thought I'd married a thought I married a man, but I married a monk. I suspect that is untrue, but the fact is she had 2 daughters by Louis. I'm thinking now, that's just me. I'm thinking that would have been more important because she had not produced a son. We all understand that reality. But the story of the, being a monk, and true, Louis VII was very pious, but that doesn't mean he wasn't capable of having a good time. And whether or not Eleanor was as frisky on crusade, I don't know. Again, I don't want to go back to the historical novels. But those of you who read these or have them in your home, I want you to understand, I don't find fault with that, but I warn you, there are stories that she had an affair with her uncle in the Middle East, mind you. And I'm saying, would you have affairs in the Middle East? Well, we are on a crusade. I met Uncle Raymond. I never met him before. This isn't something out of, this is nothing sleazy. I don't want you to think I tell bad stories. But apparently the story was, I know you're my uncle, and yet you're quite a guy. Quite a guy. Yeah, again, some of these sordid, not the kind you would read, but this is sordid, licentious, something that you wouldn't want to be near. No, you wouldn't permit your children to look at that. And you're not prudish, I understand that, but you understand that we do not know the details. But when they got back, we're hitting divorce court. Yeah. And the story goes that the Pope was not normally, he wasn't happy about the situation. And, they probably tried to talk it out. Can this marriage be saved? That was, when I was a boy, I think that was in one of my mother's magazines, Ladies and Gentlemen. And so that was the idea, papal representatives would try, but Louis was ready. I need to move on. We've had that crusade, didn't work, and I'm very unhappy. They say they had the two daughters now, and they will both go on and, like their mother, be major figures in courtly love literature. So it wasn't that. He loved his daughters, but I'm sure he wanted a son. So, much to the unhappiness of the church, the Pope agreed to an annulment, and that was that. And of course, she started dating, as they say nowadays. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, could you imagine how fast you have to go on the web and, checking out possibilities? Former queen looking for romance. So, yeah, I'm thinking how licentious, this would not be in a nice book that you would have in your home or your collection. This is because you would have G-rated stuff, but this is R. Yeah. So, but that was a very short courtship because young Henry was, as we all know, it wasn't Peter O'Toole exactly, but he was very excited and ready for the opportunity. And you can just imagine Suger was just very, very upset that this whole plan of his to bring in Aquitaine to France had fallen so desperately. And now Henry, King of England, was now Duke of Aquitaine, being her husband. And we have, of course, the famous marriage of Henry and Eleanor, and some of you have seen the movie, or maybe many versions of it. It's quite a story. And that allows me to go to England and just talking about King Alfred. So we always think about all these areas, but look at all that's green. I always think that's interesting. When you think Ireland and Scotland, yes, that's not a part of our picture. But then you see also the West and the islands there. They're not either. The others, the areas that are colored, are part of what will become the first England. And of course, there's a whole class on this, so I'm not going into a lot of detail here about Danes and English and all of that, which is so interesting. But Alfred's considered the first English king because what you see up there in the Northumbria and all of that will be destroyed by the Danes. And you can see now, for those who are interested about the Danish settlements and their contribution to the development of medieval England. You see East Essex and Wessex and all the rest, the kingdoms that existed. And of course, they got religion and they became Christians and of course, Alfred brought those Danes to the church and eventually they came around. And so the idea being that out of this, after centuries, there will be a Christianized English/Anglo-Saxon kingdom with the suppression of the Celtic peoples and the Danes as sort of reluctant collaborators, shall we say, because they were kind of kissing cousins, I guess you would say. You know, when you think about the Anglo-Saxons and the Danes who had settled there. All of this is to say, here come the Normans. And of course, we understand we just can't wait to go to Normandy this summer. Yes, that's a trip that I'm sure many of you have already made and going to make, and understand the significance of Normandy to England. I'm assuming that when you talk to French people in Normandy, they will go, oui, and they understand that great connection. But in fact, the story of how this came about, which is fascinating in it of itself, and we associate with William the Conqueror, has to do with the fact, of course, that William the Conqueror's aunt was a Norman herself and had connections as a result of the childless English king Edward the Confessor, which is another story, and there may be a novel about this. That Edward the Confessor was childless not for religious reasons, but for other reasons. Whatever the case, and we will never know, obviously, but the conflict over who would get the English throne will lead, of course, to the Normans. But the story of how he did it and Harold will be a fascinating one, and one that I will go into great details. I promise you that. But the fact is that William, who was actually illegitimate, as we all know, didn't seem to stop him, though, did it? He just went right on, and as Duke of Normandy now became King of England. And it is a very fascinating story, and one that I'm sure they have lots of interesting items in it, Canterbury Cathedral and elsewhere, because I'm not sure why they have Cherbourg marked here on this map, but it is interesting to think about how close all of this is, relatively speaking, Normandy and England. You know, all I really know about him in terms of physical is that he was very short and stout, but I guess if we wanted a Hollywood type to play him, I don't know who that would be, but the idea is that as King of England, I would always think you would have a certain language issue, because the Normans by this point have been Frenchified. So you say, well, don't we just all do Latin? I don't think so. I think that there is a form of English that regular people talk. And so there was always that problem. However, what we do find out in that time period, and this is the reign 1066 to 1087, is that William came in and basically, if the sources are to be believed, revolutionized England. because I'll never forget going up to Worcester, because I was always fascinated about the sauce, you put on steak. And I know, I was young. And yeah. And then you think, what is so interesting about that? Well, I'm glad you asked, because he let the English bishop stay in. And there weren't many of them. Most of them lost their positions. You hear about that in the papers and internet. They all got sacked. Yeah. And if you were a bishop, wouldn't you feel terrible? And you didn't get your pension or something? Yeah. I mean, you're still breathing. That's good. But the idea is they replaced all those English bishops. And I know you're going to ask me, so I'm going to go on and tell you now, so that you will be, your Ollie tuition money will be well spent. St. Wolfstone. Okay, and he's not Norman. So he got to hold his position, and I guess I wouldn't say kissed up to the Normans, but let's just say he was an unusual English bishop. Most of them, you're gone. Okay, so, and you say, well, why are these Normans being put in? Is it because they won the most religious, most pious award? I think not. I think they kissed up and they were younger sons or sycophants of various sorts who would get these positions. All in all, then, the Normans installed themselves well in what has been called one of the greatest real estate transformations, because not only church lands, but you're an English lord. And you think, well, I mean, I'm sure there were some who could play up to the Normans and say, gosh, I was hoping you would get here. Oh, I hope you had a nice trip. Welcome. I mean, it's like, probably not. A lot of them were not, what would you say, World War II collaborators. Yeah. So they were, yeah, we miss Alfred, they're feeling nostalgia, but it's a little late for that now. We're all about the Normans. And so this will be the installation of feudal principles that I wanted to emphasize here, because we already have feudal principles in France, right? So now we import it into Norman territories. And it's a very odd business. It doesn't mean that, because this is something people often confuse. It doesn't mean that we sit down with a map. You say, now, all this is yours and all this is yours. What William and his entourage will do is split up their vassals' lands into parts. And you know why, don't you? Because we don't want one of our vassals to get too much land together. We want them to be good little vassals. Yes, I know they did vows of fealty, and we're happy, and they love Jesus. We get that. We're glad. But just to keep them on the safe side, little insurance, we split up their fees to prevent anyone from getting too much. And that will be the same with the bishop's lands or abbots. Abbots had land too. Abbots need land. Yeah. I mean, Norman abbots, that is. You Anglo-Saxon losers. Yeah. So you're getting no land. You can go back to that poverty that you love so much, because that's the truth though. Yeah. I mean, it's like all of that. it's very, very complicated. But in fact, William will maintain and establish, indeed, this whole feudal structure with the suzerains and all the rest of it. And if it hadn't been for an unfortunate battle in Normandy, he would have lived past 1087, but that, that happens. You can see the tombs. You may have seen them. You've taken tours over there in one of Normandy's great cathedrals. So that's always very interesting to see. And of course, our friend Henry, Eleanor's husband, will be a descendant of William the Conqueror. And speaking of that dynamic duo, look at all that land. If you lusted after land, most of us lust after money, but land is money for some. And you can look at what was called the Angevin Empire from the Anjou, the land, the county, I should say, which is next to Normandy, and will become part of Henry's inheritance. It's like you're holding all of this, and you think, I wonder how long this will last. Well, not long, but inherited, acquired, it's all very good. And look at Carlisle. Some of you have been up there, and there's York and Chester. So these are all there's Bristol. So these are all very nice places. And in terms of England, although I think whatever we may think of Henry II, I'm thinking he was probably more French than he was English and spent more time there. But certainly there was a lot of land that he held, and he kept going north. And we know that will become a problem eventually. And then notice where we go west. I have read that the derivation of the term beyond the pale comes from the idea of Henry's forces and those of other English rulers going outside Dublin and meeting not a warm reception. So that's beyond the pale being beyond that area. But I do find it interesting, Waterford, I assume that the crystal company comes from that particular that we associate there. But some of you, I'm sure, have been there and know this particular area, and you think, so you mean this Anglo-Irish relationship goes way back, and it's never been good. So I think this is just the start. But again, they are territories that the English more or less hold, and they will get more. And of course, we all know that the English will also move northward against the Celts. And then you look at all this wonderful French land down south. It is amazing, again, to understand how temporary all this is. I mean, it's held in a feudal way. And as far as an empire, you understand these are what I call textbook terms. So somebody talks about the Angevin Empire, and then, this is the first emperor. And no, it's just a term. But it's convenient to use for the idea of how much they held. But it's kind of like you're rich one day and then something happens on the markets. Yeah, we don't want to think about that. But that's life, isn't it? Just all temporary. And the idea, of course, is in one place you're a king, in another place you're a duke. And that's always hard to appreciate. And I'm not sure that the common folk understood all those distinctions that I would have them make. But I think the church would understand, and I'm sure the nobility would understand. Well, you're mighty important. We love you very much, but you're a duke here. And we have a king, and you're not it. I don't think they want to hurt your feelings, but, and that will go on. You think about it. We'll talk about this in the spring, the 100 Years' War. I mean, that you're a duke in France and you're a king in England. Gosh, I wish I could be a king everywhere. Well, yeah, I get that. And that, of course, is something we appreciate in the 100 Years' War. Lord of Ireland, and we see this in the writings. And speaking of the writings, this is a little early to see the writings, but we do know about the beginnings of what's called the Exchequer, an institution that lasted until the 19th century, which is a long, long time. This was the department, if you want to call it that, of administration that had control of royal finances, meaning not stick it under the bed. Just, it's like where you have those wonderful people who say disbursements and increases. Our friends at the IRS, they're excited and getting ready for us. And we understand, I mean, this is a big business and it will become increasingly large. Luckily for us, imagine if you were some young scholar just starting out and saying, I'd love to do the study of the Exchequer. Yeah, I had somebody like that. And I'd say, let's talk. Come on in the office and let's just talk about this. Are you sure this is something you really want to do? I mean, we had a reality check. Yeah. Because I thought this, I mean, how many volumes? And do you have that much money? I mean, it's going to cost a lot. Could you imagine what a dissertation? Now we're talking a big one, big. And he could still be there writing now. But yeah, the enormity of the financial records. And I'm not sure who would read it. Maybe his parents, but I'm not I'm not sure. I mean, this is not something you want paperbacks. So, a history of the Exchequer, you're thinking you want to get that one on Amazon? I don't know. That's not going to be a seller. No excitement there. I mean, it's significant. We love College of Business, War Eagle. I get it. But the history of the Exchequer can be a real sleeper, I can tell you. But very, very important and very significant. In addition to that, the beginnings of a court system and legal history, which I will say now, that's studied quite a bit and has been and will be that first year of law school, actually, when they will get into common law and how it came about, for better or for worse, and how important that is. And that goes all the way back to Henry II, which I think is kind of interesting. You always say, how much has that got to do with Henry II personally? I'm not sure about that. It's like saying Justinian's law code. How much did Justinian? It's more or less they supported it. So they get some credit for it in this particular period. And it is a long period, 1154 to 1189. It's just that even Henry had enemies. And here's one of them. You know, you wonder if these portrayals are anything like them. But the idea of being Augustus, you know, one of the James Bonds played him in the movie. I can't even think of his name, but I'm sure some of you probably know. In the movie The Lion in Winter. What's his name?
Timothy Dalton.
Is that his name?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't want to get you anything. All right, yeah, there you go.
Anthony Hopkins played.
Yeah,
Richard.
he did. So the idea is Philip Augustus, and you say, gosh, what a great name. I wish somebody would call me Augustus. I mean, I just Gus. I mean, but the idea of that is just basically you're the increaser, because Philip will lift the Capetians out of being just, you know, trapped around in the Paris area and develop France, becoming very, very successful. If you want to believe the movie or other sources, he resented how his father had been treated by Henry and Eleanor. And I don't know how much this is personal. This could be the stuff of novels and movies. But it's definitely true that Philip was a very ambitious individual, and he had great interest in taking over as much as he could. And it would appear that Henry was not particularly disposed towards getting along with the French monarchy. And the result was, of course, great problems, not only because of the desire of two ambitious people, but remember, there's the matter of Henry's children. And somebody mentioned Anthony Hopkins, and that was Richard, was it not? And then, of course, there's King John. In other words, too many children. I think fertility's nice, but sometimes it can get a little out of hand. And that is definitely true. Oh, remember Jeffrey? Yuck. I mean, it's like, yeah. Yeah, I know. It's like we have the children, again, lots of movies, but all of this is to say that, you know, we always hope they'll grow up and they'll be devoted. They'll remember us in May and June. They'll think about us, the parents and grandparents, and, you know, and just love us. And not so much in this case. Henry II and Eleanor not only dislike each other, but they dislike their own children. And that is part of the story. And one of them, of course, is everybody's, who do we want to hate the most? And John. I'm thinking about 2015. And you say, why 2015? Well, that was the year we remembered Magna Carta, and there were big ceremonies and dues. There, the Queen and her grandson were there. It was quite a big deal there at Runnymede, eating and so forth. But much has been written and said about King John. You say, well, aren't you missing somebody? No, he's coming back. He's coming the Crusades Day. I'm just leaving him out for right now because John has our interest here because John, ironically, was his father's favorite. That's right. He was the little pet. And I think he was somewhat obsequious. At least in the movie he was. And you think of everything you dislike, the worm, what is they say, kissing up to, and all the rest. So if any of this is true of King John, he got his comeuppance during his reign. As the younger brother of a childless king, his way would be more or less set to gain the throne. Now, some may be aware of the fact that he did have a nephew. Yeah, I know. And that was ugly, and this would have to, Agatha Christie might have written about it, the corpse in the prison, but yeah, this was the older brother, Jeffrey, who had a son, and John may have found it necessary to dispose of him. But we will never know, because sometimes, I know it's like something else, Sopranos. It's like, it just gets to be annoying. He's not convenient to have him around, because he can claim, well, my dad was ahead of you. So he says, well, I guess you won't be around too much longer. And that was the end of poor little fella. But that was not the reason, as you might think, why John had his problems. He committed a very, very serious faux pas. And that is getting engaged to a vassal's wife to be. That's a strange business. John had already been married, and now he wanted another marriage. I guess he wanted children. I guess that was the reason. It's never been clear why he and the first wife, maybe she was not considered valuable enough. But whatever the case, he was presumably headed to Spain, and he was going south. And the story goes that his vassals, or rear vassals, that is, vassal of vassal, had a beautiful young daughter who was already engaged. But John, as the Duke, remember, not king, but Duke, he was very interested in her. Her name is Isabella, in case somebody asks you. And now he says, I know it's our first date, but I'm really, really interested. Maybe we can go out and have a soda or something later, or go out for coffee. I don't know what it was, but they get engaged. Oh, Lord. And you say, well, that was nice. No, it's not. Because his vassal is offended. Not her father. Oh, her father's going around with that chest all stuck out, strutting around, saying, yeah, I'm hot. The king's going to marry me. But the vassal, his name is Hugh, and he's like, you've hurt my feelings. Don't get mad, get even. Yeah. So it sounds preposterous, doesn't it? Now, there may be some Harlequin novel in which it's like his heart is broken. I'll never get over this. We're returning the ring to Wales or wherever, remember when people used to get all their engagement rings it wears. Yeah, I wears, yeah. But that idea, I gotten over that in this period of life. I'm thinking it had more purpose of power and control. So, what does Hugh do? I'll tell you what he does. He gets in touch with Paris. And I don't know if he goes there in person. I doubt that. I imagine this is all done through messengers, and I don't mean on Facebook. I mean, we're talking pages and so forth. But he basically says, you know what happened? My local lord committed a no-no, and I'm really hurt. I think you should know about it. You know, the little tattletale. Yeah. You know, I love you, Miss Jones, but that person next to me was very naughty in class and said something about, you know, the type. Yes, we've all experienced that. So, however, the word got to Philip, you can imagine Philip was thrilled. Are you serious? Sacre, we're shocked. Oh no, you don't mean he took your, well, we'll see about that. He broke a solemn betrothal. And God intended for you all to be together, and now I'm shocked, I'm hurt. I'm not mad, but our relationship is broken. You need to come to Paris. And I mean, this whole absurdity will go on. And John says, basically, I'm not coming. You know, I mean, it's like, is this mature? Not exactly. But technically, you see, he should have been going to Paris to answer the charge of contumacity. How do you like that?
Yeah.
Contumacity. I know. Contumacious adjective, but I made it to a noun for you. Poo-poo. So the idea being that John does not go there. And that plays right into Philip's hands. Say, gosh, well, my court will now have to say you're contumacious. Bad vessel, bad vessel. Or should I say, former vessel? Because you know what you are? You're an LOSER. Yeah. And but John, being the sort he is going to say, in effect, well, I'm not going to leave. So what are you going to do about it? And of course, that will mean, interestingly, that there will actually be some military action, and it will be apparently very significant because of whatever military wherewithal Philip had. These forces will go into Normandy and those territories and take them over. Aquitaine, no, but other territories like Normandy and Anjou will be given up. And again, I don't want to say there is some sort of, great French flag and everybody's singing the Marseillaise. That's always the risk here. We understand it's all about the ruler and the monarchy and that authority, because I'm thinking if and when the English have the means to come back, they'll say, wow, bring out the red, white, and blue. We're so glad to welcome you. I mean, I'm not sure we feel that French in Normandy at this point. I'm just saying we get along with whoever is in control. But it's certainly true that these lands will go in control. And that's why I find this map so very dramatic. The maps, I should say. Oh, say, gosh, it was so wonderful. You say, I'm missing my Angevin Empire. Those were the days, my friend. Yeah. And you say, even a pretty color. Yeah. And then look at 1223. Yikes. Well, I guess you're pretty proud of yourself, John. Yeah. Yeah. And again, it does seem very dramatic. Even all of that territory in South France. And again, it's hard to understand unless you think about John had other problems, as we well know. But certainly we start here because you can imagine his father, Henry II, there in purgatory, is saying, you know, you are one bad king. Yeah. And if I could get my hand on you, you would be going down. But anyway, I thought it was interesting. What's that, about 40 to 50 years? And again, things are going to be better in the spring when we see the 100 Years' War and Henry V. So don't lose hope. I mean, we've got some good English times coming up. Now, when he gets home, that is John, after the campaign, he will find problems ahead. And of course, that's why 1215 is so important. It's very interesting to go to Runnymede nowadays, and you can see Eton and all so much, Windsor Castle. Not trying to get you on a tour, I'm just saying it's a very interesting area. And it's amazing to me to see the memorial to President Kennedy, which was erected there with the permission of the then Jacqueline Kennedy, because that was what Queen Elizabeth wanted to do. And there are memorials back in the 1950s from the American Bar Association. So anyway, it's a very interesting place to see. The idea of the king sealing Magna Carta was, I'm sad to say, not sincere. And because you like to believe that people are telling you the truth, but sometimes they're mendacious. Okay. Yes, it's mendacity. Every day I hear about people like that. And so all of these mendacious people are best personified by King John, although I think the nobles, the bishops, and others who were there at Runnymede, who demanded the agreement to limit royal authority and to allow basic rights as they understood them, will be very, very significant. And that's why it's fascinating to me, you know, this whole 2015 thing about the extensions of Magna Carta and how it's viewed in so many different ways that would never have been thought of in 1215. But the world changes and grows, and you'll be able to see memorials to many of these concerns about human rights and otherwise that have come about since the 13th century. Again, that's why I think the Queen and the now Prince of Wales were there way back when. Not the Prince of Wales then, but the Prince of Wales now. But it was very, very dramatic back in 2015 when they were there. Quite a ceremony. Now, Meanwhile, there was Louis the Ninth, aka St. Louis. I know Missouri, the Arch, and all of us love the city. And does everyone appreciate Louis the Ninth? I don't know. He is a fascinating guy. He was canonized pretty early on, and his mother was a Castilian, and he was king as a child. That's why his mother, who was quite powerful, and she would not allow anyone, no noble, no bishop, or anyone to mess with her. What are they called? Stage show mothers? Yeah. She was one, and she had power because her husband died in a crusade, and she took over, and she was going, don't mess with little Louis, or else I'll take care of you. And she remained powerful. I think even his wife was afraid of her. I mean, she was tough cookie. Blanche of Castile, very interesting. And she was connected to Eleanor of Aquitaine. So I think it's a very interesting figure. But when you think about how women could exert power back then, you had to have a child, or you had some other way to maintain themselves. Now you see Jews, Muslims, heretics, but she loved everybody else. So it's like they didn't make the cut. But the idea of Louis was not only that he was a zealous son of the church and son of Blanche. Yes, Mama. Believe me, she would supervise everything. He was very devoted to the church, but he was also devoted to being French king. So when the time came, Blanche would allow that, and his deeds would become well known. She would take authority later when he went on a crusade, and he actually was sickened, very sickened by that particular trip. It was a minor crusade to Egypt and didn't especially work. But the idea is that he would go out among the people and give alms and devote himself to the church. And by early in his grandchildren's time, the end of the 13th century, the Pope's canonized. You say, well, that's pretty fast. You are very right. Do you know how long it took Joan of Arc? Yeah. I mean, we talk about late bloomer here. 20th century, man, you're waiting and you're waiting. Did the paperwork not go through? What's the problem? I mean, you have to have the Pony Express in France, in Italy to get there. I mean, we got all this stuff submitted. So we got him in 1297. You can put that down in case we have friends from Missouri. We all love Missouri. The Arches, beer. And we understand, of course, that people in St. Louis may want to know about 1297 and the canonization. So you just let them know. And that's Louis the Ninth, St. Louis. Oh, there he is. And look at that. Yeah. And of course, helping the poor. And the idea is that he is loving of the common folk. So, and of course, They open that church and you hear that bell, and guess who's on the front row? Yep, you got it. It's Louis the Ninth, along with Margaret of Anjou, the wife, and gazillion children. So yeah, he is the prize Capetian. It's like, who do you want to talk about in terms? Every royal family's got to have a saint. You don't want to be in the get left out there. No. The idea, of course, is that sometimes popes will say, we love you, Louis, you're a great king. We're having a lot of problems down in Palermo. Yeah. So just trying to connect. I want to relate to people. So we lost Sicily and thinking there's a ruler down there, a damned ruler. Yeah. And maybe, Louis, we love you so much. We love you too, Holy Father, but no, we wouldn't be interested in helping out a war effort. War appeal. Oh, and Louis won't get involved. He'll say, gosh, we want to wish you all the best. Bon France, as we say in Paris. But we've got some really great projects going on, beating up on Muslims in Egypt and this and that. But we really can't help you. Palermo, yeah, that again. So it didn't work out for them, but Louis will be the most Christian king, the saintly ruler who loves the common people, down with the nobles and up with the people, that kind of thing, unless you're a heretic. Stay away from me, you free thinker, you are trouble, capital T. Henry III, oddly enough, King John's son. Can you imagine? People can be ugly. Your father was a loser. But that's Henry III. His reign was equally disastrous. But it's interesting that he and Louis IX, St. Louis, were actually married to sisters. So I always think about all those Thanksgivings, they could like, fun, we're so excited getting together with the royal family. Oh, I love you. And like the current one, I'm not sure that would be so much fun, but we understand that Henry III will have interest in getting back his lands. Don't you think he thinks about Normandy? Oh, Daddy, you lost Normandy. I love you and we miss you very much, but now we have to get back Normandy. I mean, that's money. That's some serious economic losses. So we have the idea then that the relationship between Louis and Henry was not always warm. You know what? It was not a feudal relationship. But that had been cut off, hadn't it? With John and Philip II. Have you ever thought about that? Think about it right now. Okay. And you say, gosh, are they going to reunite? Well, not yet. But for years, it's like we have reunions. Thanksgiving, the turkey, and you can carve this year, next year. But I love you too, sis. It was good to have seen you all. And y'all come to our house next year. That kind of thing. And you're thinking, but there's no feudal connection. So all of this then to say is that Louis and Henry have their issues. But Henry has other problems. And they are summed up best for us in the figure of Simon de Montfort, who has his own memorial. And guess what you can do? There is a memorial to him. And go to the House of Commons and you say, I just love Simon de Montfort, and they will be amazed. I don't know if they will be interested, but they will be amazed. You know about him? Because he is, of course, a major 13th century figure. Believe it or not, he was married to Henry's sister. Thanksgivings can be very difficult for some families. Yeah, some families I know are all about love and unity, but I'm not sure about this one. And they may have had to get married. Yeah, that happens. Because Simon was actually French, and he was sort of dating Henry's sister, and yeah. But that was the story that went about. In any event, Simon knew and acknowledged that he was quite a lot more intelligent and gifted in politics and government than the king was. And what do? When that happens, you lead people and take over the government. And that's what he did. It didn't last long. And it's not like Oliver Cromwell, because there was never an idea of not having a king. He was just going to take over in the name of the king. The king was not happy about this, but it's like, you'll be happy later on. Right now, we just want to work on some issues. We'll have a council. And is this going to be acceptable to Henry III? No way, no how. So it's a very, very difficult situation. And of course, Simon had an ego on him, capital E. I mean, certainly he wanted to do what was right and to serve the interests of the subjects and make for a better government. And he, on the other hand, was not tactful with the king and his family. And so he will end up, of course, being overthrown, and he will die. I might add that I found this also interesting, that after he did die, you know what people would do? These are monks. It's like almost like little scouts, because they will then gather up pieces of Simon, because in the battle, and these are the parts you want to skip, because often you think they would want to preserve him. Well, there's not a whole lot you can preserve except little pieces, a finger here, a toe there. I know. But the monks are going to go, it's kind of like being on the beach and getting the seashell. So they get the pieces. Oh, nee, nice. Très bon. Because then we can have a display. Yeah, a relics display. And what can you do at relics display? Cash money. Because admission, just a love offering, you have to pay general admission. I mean, and if you just show your church badge, you get a discount. But the idea is they would have Simon de Montfort relics for those who choose to participate. But that was the end of him. Henry's son, of course, Edward I, will be known for the so-called model parliament, which wasn't a model at all, but it seemed to be, because that's the way we see it. You see him there and see those rich folks in the back lined up in the black, because they're not nobles and they're not bishops. They're just rich. But we need rich people, don't we? Okay. You rich people, don't think I'm knocking you. I'm just saying. And then you have royal officials. You have the Archbishops of Canterbury and York. You have the heirs to the throne and various other dignitaries. I think it's funny though, they're sitting on wool because of course so much of the economy depends on wool. Lord knows I've run into enough sheep over there, right? So yeah, walk carefully. And this particular institution, House of Lords, House of Commons, it's not there yet. That's why I mentioned that the institutional form that we associate with it of Lords and Commons will not come about until the 14th century. And finally, I cannot end without him. Now, speaking of fiction, Braveheart, every student, when that thing came out, every student would start wearing the t-shirts and the hats. I said, folks, let it go. That is not the foundation of Scotland. I said, no, I just need to be quiet. This too will pass. But it was harsh. It was harsh those days. And he made a lot of money for this individual. Good grief. I don't want to talk about historical errors here. Because if you believed any of that, but yes, we're ready for Scottish nationalism after that. And don't bring up Edward Longshanks because there's some issues with that. But they stayed very, very busy in war, didn't they? The English and the Scots. So does that mean that England has nationalism? I don't think so. But I definitely think that the pressure of one against another will create a feeling perhaps of this is ours and that's not yours. But who knows? I know that the idea of the Scots and their hatred of the English is definitely clear by the time of this William Wallace, who became better known because of this movie than any history book that I know of. So we're going to the medieval universities next time. So please come back. I'll see you all next week. Thank you.